Here at Cork and Fizz, I'm all about helping you discover new wines. Yes, I know it's easy to just continue to buy your favorite bottle, but I have to tell you, you're missing out. Did you know there are over 10,000 different grape varieties and over 65,000 wine producers worldwide? Trust me, there are so many more delicious wines out there for you to try, and your next favorite bottle is just waiting for you to find it. In an effort to encourage you to try something new, I'm bringing back my free Summer Wine Challenge. That's right, it's free. Head to the link in my show notes, corkandfizz.com/summer wine challenge to sign up. This challenge will last 6 weeks, and during that time, all I ask is that you try 6 new wines and fill out a simple tasting form on my website for each one. I'll also be sending you exclusive weekly emails with recommendations for regions and wines to explore. Plus, you'll have access to not one, but 2 free live virtual tastings where you get to learn about and taste wine with me and fellow challenge goers. If you successfully taste and record 6 new wines in the 6 weeks, you'll receive a class pass, which gives you access to a virtual tasting party of your choosing with my tasting club, the Cork Crew. Plus, everyone who completes the challenge will be entered to win a free 1-year membership to the Cork Crew, with one lucky winner being chosen at the end of July. We start June 19th, but you can sign up anytime between now and before the challenge ends on July 30th. Head to the link in my show notes to join me. Oh, and did I mention it's free? Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. On today's episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast, you are in for a special treat. We are going to be talking about Croatian wine with a gal who spends half her year in Croatia every year. Her name is Jennifer Kerum, and I've actually had a chance to drink wine with Jen in person because she joined me on the Walla Walla trip. She is such a fun burst of energy and so passionate. You're going to learn so much during this podcast and things that don't really get talked about in the wine world. We don't hear about Croatian wine very much, and so it was really an honor to get to have her on the podcast to share what she knows. And she's going to tell you about a fun food and wine cruise that she has coming up in Croatia. Plus, get excited about this, a special deal just for you as listeners of this podcast. So I'm going to step back and let Jen introduce herself and do all the talking, but you're going to love this. Make sure to stick around, like I said, until the end. We have some special offers for you if you want to check out Croatia wine, which, like, how could you not? Let's start first with kind of an intro. Who are you and what do you do?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. So what do I do and who am I? I guess it depends on the day. So, which is actually a true story.
I was going to say, actually, now that I think about it for you, yeah, that's a good fit.
It actually depends on the day. So I grew up with a Croatian father and an American mother. And so I was kind of the product of two worlds, or I guess like a global child, as you can say. So I actually got to grow up on the Adriatic Sea in Croatia, which was amazing, like every single summer. I don't think I appreciated it as a kid, to be honest with you.
I mean, you were just used to it. You're like, this is what I do. This is part of my home, right?
Well, the other problem was so we would go to Croatia and like my school would start in September typically. And so we go to Croatia, we go to the village and where, my grandmother was and my aunt was. And actually, it kind of ties into wine because I remember it was like right before I would leave Croatia, we would always have to go and have a whole day of wine picking. Worst day of my life, every single time. You're hot and you're tired and your feet like you're covered in dirt and mud and bugs and mosquitoes.
You're like, this is not fun. I don't get this. Why do people like wine?
I know. And so actually, true story, my thoughts of wine growing up was just this association of just like hard work, not enjoyment at all. But anywho, going back, so I grew up kind of in both worlds between the US and Croatia. And my parents also started their own film and television catering company. So I grew up in film. So half the year I actually work in film. The other half of the year, I own a yacht company in Croatia. And I also I just recently opened a wine tour business in Croatia. And to add on top of it, I have a food and wine cruise in Croatia.
So many exciting things. I love it.
Like I said, it depends on the day, what I do.
Yeah, you put on your different hats.
Exactly. I have multiple hats.
Yes, I love it. Okay, well, let's dive in a little bit deeper. So I do love that we kind of started this off. You're like, okay, wine just equals hard work. As a kid, it didn't make sense. What was
Yeah.
it that kind of like turned the page or turned the table for you, and what sparked your interest in wine to dive deeper into it?
Well, honestly, I grew up in California, and California has amazing wine regions, as you know. And in my 20s, personally, I hated beer. So what did I do and go out and drink? And so wine kind of piqued my interest, and I realized that I fell in love with these big, bold, luscious Napa Valley. And when I moved to New York City, I was constantly chasing that kind of taste, everything, but I had a hard time describing what I wanted, when I went out. It was like, I want this wine, but how do I tell people? Right. And I'm
Yes.
sure you come across that too, Haley, right? Like when you're teaching about wines and everything, it's like, how do you explain the flavor that you want?
Yeah, I
Right.
find like most people are like, I know what I like. How do I explain that to anybody? Like getting those words is one of the hardest things.
Exactly, exactly. So when I was in New York, and I have an even crazier background because I actually came from medical school too. So
You're like, stick around for the long version. We'll have that as the extended cut. And then
break this podcast up into different ones. I'm like, what time of year? Anyway, yeah, I wanted to communicate. I wanted to talk about wine. I wanted to find the wines that I loved. So I ended up going to ICC at the time that was here, and they had a sommelier course. And I learned everything that there is to be learned about wines. And then I remember coming back that next summer after I had all this knowledge, and I was drinking wine in Croatia, and I was like, oh my God, the wine here is delicious. Why did anyone tell me? Which is a lie.
fair, fair. You're like, well, because one, nobody in the US knew that the Croatian wine was so good.
Exactly. Like no one knew it was so good. And the other problem is my association with wine was Harvard.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a depending on how you see it there. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. I do want to spend plenty of time talking about Croatian wine, but first I have to ask about the yacht business. Like, how does one get into the yacht business and what is it like?
So my story, I never, like, if I could say what I wanted to do when I grew up, I never thought yachts. My story is a love story, actually. I
I love
know.
that. Oh, that's so cute.
Definitely a boy meets girl kind of situation. So I obviously fell in love with Croatia growing up and then fell in love with it in, my 20s. And I would spend a month at a time in Croatia. And I'd always was thinking in the back of my head, like, how can I do this forever, right? You can't just be in a country every single year for the rest of your life without doing some sort of job. I mean, I hope it's possible.
I mean, unless you can be a trust fund baby, in which case that sounds wonderful, but not the case
Fair.
for all of us.
Not the case for me at all. So I went to Croatia one summer and I fell in love with a boy there. And I was actually living at Australia during the time. And we were actually, I remember this so clearly. So we were sitting on Huar on the rocks, ironically drinking a glass of wine. And it was, I didn't to say an ultimatum. It was basically a conversation of like, okay, Jennifer, like we've just had the most magical summer together, right? You know, it was one of those boy meets girl, girl runs away, girl comes back, you know, the end. And it's kind of like, what are we going to do here? And it was kind of born on the shores of Huar while drinking a glass of wine. He had been working in the yachting industry for 10, 15 years. And I knew that I loved Croatia and I liked the idea of being on a yacht and drinking a glass of wine.
I mean, who doesn't like that idea?
Well, we started there. I knew nothing about yachts. I knew that I loved Croatia. And then that next year, when I started cleaning and sanding boats before the season, I was like, this is nothing like drinking a glass of wine.
They lied to you.
I will say, there's a saying in the boating world. They say the two best days of your life is the day you buy your first boat and the day that you sell it.
That's fair. That's fair. You know, you've really fallen into those worlds of like, because there's the saying in the wine world of like, how do you make a small fortune in wine? You start with a large fortune.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So you really found those two industries, didn't you?
It is true. It is true. And then from there, I kind of created this like beautiful marriage between yachting and wine. And until now, where I've literally created a complete separate company that's just focused on wine.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings me into that next question. I was curious if it sounds like, I mean, even just from a kid, you initially had this, you know, passion for travel and that extended into adulthood. And now you have that interest in wine. Do you feel like those are very well connected?
100%. Like, definitely. Wherever I go to, I travel quite a bit. You know, I'm traveling every 3 to 4 days. And because of work, not just because I'm a crazy person who travels.
Hey, that's not crazy. That's just you taking advantage of having fun.
Exactly. And one of the first things I like to do is I like to go to a place and I will look up the local wineries. Like that's a huge thing for me. I mean, I was just in New Mexico, and have you had New Mexican wine before?
It's on my list. I don't, well, no, wait, I have. I've had the New Mexico, that sparkling wine, Gruet or whatever it is.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes.
So they do a lot. So me too. Like, so I've tried, you know, sparkling wine before, and I was just in Albuquerque, and obviously I looked up what wineries were nearby. And I went to, there's one called Shihan, I think. Oh, I'm probably butchering the name. I tried their Syrah and their Cabernet Sauvignon, and it was insanely delicious.
Wow.
One of the fascinating things for me about their cab specifically was it almost tasted like an Amarone. It had a lot of like, right? It had a lot of like those dried aspects, like those, you know, dried plums and raisins. I asked them, I said, why is this wine what it is? And one of the most fascinating things that they told me was basically it gets really hot in New Mexico. So it actually tends to burn the grapes a little bit, like physically burn the grapes. And so that's why a lot of times they'll get kind of like that raisiny kind of essence on their cabs.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I like
Right?
that they're leaning into it. They're just like, this happened, so we can't control the weather, and we're just going to see what we can do with it in the winemaking.
Exactly. So traveling in wine is life for me, essentially.
Yeah. Oh, so fun. I do want to make sure we say your yacht business, it's called Anchor Croatia, correct?
It's called Anchor Croatia. So my yacht business is called Anchor Croatia. And another thing that we do is, or I do specifically, is I do a food and wine cruise.
Yes, and one of those is coming up, right?
Yes, I'm so excited about it. So it's August 24th to 31st, and we go from Dubrovnik to Split. So are you a fan of Game of Thrones at all, Haley?
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So Dubrovnik is actually King's Landing, fun fact.
That is so freaking cool. I'm so mad. The only reason I'm not going on this trip, I love my parents. My mom always listens to this podcast. I love you, Mom. But they are visiting during that time that you
I know.
are doing this. Otherwise, this sounds so amazing. And how freaking cool is that? You'd be like, I get food and wine in Croatia, plus I get to pretend that I'm in Game of Thrones for a second.
Oh, exactly. And so it's really, for me too, like there's other cruises in Croatia, but like none of them is really focused on the flavors and the authenticity of the country. So one of my personal favorite things about the country in general is the food. Like it's something like even something eating something simple as like a tomato there, you know, it's like it's the best tomato ever. On this cruise, we get to island hopping. You get to literally jump right off the ship into like the most beautiful picturesque water. We visit seaside towns. We actually get to go to a third generation owned restaurant on the sea. And We eat everything from his garden, fresh caught fish that day, and of course, his homemade wine.
Oh, wonderful. That sounds so fun.
Bring your parents.
There we go. Man, I can barely get my dad to Seattle, let alone if I'm like, Dad, we're going to Croatia. One day we'll make it out there. But I will make sure for those that are listening, this should release. You'll still have plenty of time to do that. Just, go on an adventure, have fun. We'll put the link in the description so folks can learn more about it. Now, before we leave talking about Croatia and your travel and all of this, because we're going to do our deep dive into the wine. During the Walla Walla trip, as I mentioned in the intro, Jen, that's how we met. Jen joined me in Walla Walla for that trip. And oddly enough, like, I can't believe this happened. One of the other guests was doing a honeymoon in Croatia. Like, what were the odds? It was just one of those where it's like, oh, what a small world. But you shared such amazing tips. And I don't want you to give everything away, right? This is your job, this is your livelihood. But I thought maybe we take advantage. If you could give us maybe your top 3 tips other than come on my food and wine cruise, which is like the top tip. But after that, your top 3 tips for traveling to Croatia. Because I feel like it's getting to the top of people's list these days. Like, people want to visit.
Yeah, well, what's interesting too is so when I was a kid, no one knew where Croatia was. And I had to explain it as like the country next to Italy. Like, but these days I say that I'm half Croatian, and it really is a sexy place to go to. Well, first of all, there's 1,244 islands off the coast of Croatia. Yeah, I know. Bananas.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess my first tip about Croatia, I'm actually heading there tomorrow, is don't squeeze everything in. What I tend to find with people who come there is, especially from the States, and it's understandable, you're traveling across the world and you only have maybe a week and they try to do so much stuff. But the problem is that there's so much to do and see in Croatia, and you'll just spend too much time traveling. A lot of people will do the Dubrovnik, Hvar, Split kind of bucket list. I would stick to 2 different places. And there's actually a Croatian word called fajka, and it means the art of doing nothing.
I love that. And I also know I would have such a hard time doing that.
You really want to experience Croatia, in my opinion. I think you just need to slow it down. That's the culture. Like, for example, when you go to Croatia, people will sit for one coffee for 3 hours.
Dang.
Yes. 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 So my first tip would be come to Croatia, but don't overpopulate your itinerary. Really enjoy it. Go to the sea, eat delicious food. My second tip is, so we're used to sandy beaches, right? In the United States. They are small pebbles over there. So I'm used to walking on them, but a lot of Americans, it's not the same.
It's a good thing to call out. Wasn't the gal that was on the trip, she was like, so bringing water shoes, is that dorky or should I do it? Sounding like it's a yes.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? For your mental health and body, bring it.
And who knows, maybe you've built up the calluses and you'll be fine, but you'll be so much more thankful that you have them.
Exactly. Exactly. And then my third tip really just focuses around food. Just try everything there. I would even go as far as get out of the main town. Like if you go to Dubrovnik, I don't like to eat in the old town. I get out of the old town. And there's these things called konobars. And that's where everything is just homemade. You're going to get like homemade olive oil and homemade cheese and just everything locally sourced. So eat everything, try all of the wine because you won't be able to find it in the United States, and leave with at least 12 bottles.
I like that. That's great advice. All right, before we get to this, is our last question before we get into our Croatian wine deep dive. I usually save it for the end, but like I said, I want to kind of have the second half all be about Croatian wine. We talked about the cruise, but just maybe like looking down the line. I feel like this is always a fun question, especially for someone like you where you're like entrepreneur mindset, doing lots of different things and have all these ideas. What's next for you? Anything new on the horizon or anything new you'd like to do, but you maybe just haven't set in motion yet?
Well, actually, I'm really haven't told anyone this except for my partner. So this is actually huge. I'm actually currently writing a book about Croatian wine.
No way!
Yeah.
So exciting!
Yeah. And I was gonna save this for later, but I'm just telling you now. And I'm hoping to get it out in the next year. And because what I found is when I was doing my own research, a couple, years ago, there wasn't a lot of resources on Croatian wine. And there is some, but it's more focused towards like a traveler coming to Croatia and experiencing. But for wine people or wine professionals who want to like deep dive on like the terroir and the soil and the temperature and the microclimates, it doesn't exist. So it's a thing that I'm doing and I'm really excited.
Ah, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, I can't wait. That is exactly what I love seeing those. I have one, Jane Lopes just put one out on Australia because it was kind of the same thing. She's like, there are maybe some guides out there, and we get a bunch of Shiraz from Australia, blah, blah, blah. She's like, there is so much more happening here, and no one has written the book that says like, here's like your basics when you want to learn about it. Or like I just did a tasting on Lebanese wine, Lebanon, and trying
Ooh,
to find information on wines from Lebanon was very challenging. Even like my go-to resources, I mean, the wine Bible, things like that, they didn't have much on it at all.
I know. I'm actually excited to get into the history of wine about Croatia because it will kind of reflect on why it's like that. But I do agree. I think on some of the more unknown regions, and maybe that is because of access to the wine, there isn't a lot of resources. And so my goal is in the next year, so hopefully in a year from now, we'll have another podcast. We'll talk
Yes,
about
yeah, absolutely. I'm scheduling it in right now, so I'm gonna hold you to it.
what will be done by then. And then you could hopefully come on my food and wine cruise.
Yes, absolutely. I'm loving all of
2025.
this. We've got it all planned
Exactly.
out.
Be great. What we'll do is you'll read the book and we'll just island hop and try all the wines as
There we go. Perfect. All right, this is our perfect segue then into let's talk Croatian wine. And I figured we'll kind of start. I always like to start at the beginning. So, like, basically, what do you think folks would be surprised to hear? Well, first of all, folks, I think some would be surprised that there is a lot of wine in Croatia. They've
yeah.
maybe heard of it, but like, even for me as a wine expert, I mean, I've heard of like Slovenia and like Lebanon and Georgia, but not really Croatia much. Can you start with like maybe just a little history and like your short intro of like what would you tell people is the world of wine in Croatia?
Yeah. So one of the fascinating things to me is that Croatia has one of the oldest wine regions. So it goes back to the Illyrian tribes that came, and after that, it was the Greeks, and they came to the islands of Vis and Korčula and Hvar. And fun fact, on the island of Hvar is a town called Starigrad, and it's one of the oldest towns in all of Europe. And beyond that, it's one of the oldest places where they've planted wine for over 2,400 years.
Wow.
So there is actually a huge history of wine and winemaking. Like I said, going back from the Greeks and the Romans. In fact, on the island of Vis, War, there's vineyards that have never even been touched by phylloxera.
I mean,
So
I guess that makes sense with it because it's an island, right? So it'd be hard for
exactly.
the phylloxera to get there.
Exactly. So especially Viz. So there is a grape on Viz called Vugova, and it's an indigenous grape on Viz Island. And you have vineyards that have been there for more than 2,400 years.
Really? And even
Yeah,
like, so there are people tending to those vineyards and making wine out of the vines.
correct. I mean,
Wow.
obviously throughout the years they've done all kinds of pruning and all these other things and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, it's the same location, a lot of times same families pass through generations. So for me, when I'm talking about Croatian wine, it's like basically you have to talk about politics because no, unfortunate, but it's the reality of the situation. Croatia could have been one of the most important producers as much as Italy or France, just because of where it's located, because of its climate. I mean, especially in Dalmatia, you have very warm summers, mild winters. So many grapes can grow there. It's amazing terrain, so much sunshine, but politics. It always goes back to politics.
Yes. I've heard that a lot from like also like when I did the research into like Georgia or Lebanon too. They're places where like it I think does Croatia, I know it's near Italy, so it's not as close to these regions, but
Mhm.
I would still consider it part of like the ancient world when we think of like the different types of
Exactly.
wine. Like there's like the new world, which is everywhere besides Europe essentially, where like
Mhm.
grapevines were brought. Then there's the old world, which is Europe, where we think of like where modern winemaking began. But then there's a time even before that where like true winemaking and like the very first vines, and that's the ancient world. And so does Croatia fit into that category?
100%.
Okay.
So this is where it gets really interesting. So Croatia was a prominent producer of wine. In fact, even when it was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, wines from Croatia were being actually sought out and shipped all over. But the problem was in 1918 to 1991, it was under Yugoslavia. So it was under communist rule. And communism didn't allow for independent winemakers to sell wines. And so what happened was, is if you were a farmer and you had owned these vineyards hundreds of years, you had a choice. You could either basically continue to make wine for yourself and produce it for yourself, or you can sell it to the state. And that is exactly, and that is the biggest problem. That is what's happened with Croatia, where to me it's so sad because it's like, it really is one of these ancient world places. It still has, I mean, there still exists about 150 indigenous grapes. Before that, it was like estimated maybe 600 indigenous grapes existed in Croatia. And a lot of it got lost because of communism, because of war. But the cool side of that, like the opposite side of that, and what's fascinating about Croatia is that even today, like I would say 70% of families own their own vineyards and they produce their own wines. And it goes back to the fact where wine is life in Croatia. It really is. I mean, my aunt, my boyfriend's parents, like my grandmother, no, grows their own grapes to make wine. And so when I say, yes, at the same time, Croatia was growing wine for mass production, the quality didn't disappear because families were still producing high quality wines. And those traditions were passed throughout the years.
Wow. Yeah. So thankful for those people who did that, right? To like keep the wine around and keep it, especially even though we lost a lot of indigenous varieties, 150 is still a lot, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I want to dive into the regions and the grapes, but I want us to kind of go in the direction. I'm going to follow your lead here of like, do you want to start with like, should we think of Croatia as these like indigenous grapes first, or is it better to kind of explain by like region and where the grapes grow?
I think talking about the indigenous grapes is really important. I think there's two huge reasons why people should care about Croatian wine, other than the fact that it's fabulous. And I'm so going to apologize for my pronunciation to any Balkan people who ever listen to this. Moje padeže I gramatika je baš loš. Very bad.
Hey, you gotta start somewhere. You're introing everybody to it. So anybody listening to this podcast, they can at least get a start to understanding the Croatian varieties and everything. So we're very grateful.
So I speak Croatian, I understand it, but my pronunciation is very bad for everything. And the thing is that it's very different from English because it's all consonants next to each other. So it's like, it's bad. Anyways, so there is a grape called Sorlianak. Okay, yes, Sorlianak. And it comes from a small village outside of Split, maybe like 15, 20 minutes away. It was brought by the Romans and long time ago. And then it went to Puglia in Italy. From Puglia in the 1820s, it went to Long Island, New York. From Long Island, New York, it made its way out west to California. And that grape is Zinfandel.
I've heard about this. I've heard that Croatia is the true home. I used to think it was a place in Italy, but it's Croatia.
No, a lot of people thought that it was from Primitivo, so up in, exactly from Italy. But UCSD their viticulture department did a huge study. And yes, it is from a small village outside of Split in Kostela. And
Wow.
it's actually the parent. There's another grape in Croatia called Plavac Mali, and it is the child of this grape. And basically all of Zinfandel in the entire world comes from Croatia.
Wow. So is the Primitivo just a like is that was the name that Italy
Yeah,
gave it then?
exactly.
Okay.
So that's like exactly. So it went to Puglia. So from Croatia, it went to Puglia. And so Primitivo is the descendant from the Croatian original. Isn't
Okay.
that fun?
That is so cool. Isn't it so fun? I'm like such a dork, but like you can see behind me, I've got like the wine grapes, that huge, massive thing. And I've been reading that and like all the connections between the wines. And especially because I swear like they're constantly changing because like you said, they're starting to do these studies and the DNA things where they can actually
Exactly.
dive into it where like some places claim they're the place that something is from, but then you actually do the DNA study and you're like, no, 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 no. It's actually this, which is yeah, I find that so. So what was
Exactly.
the name of the Croatian grape again?
So it's Crljanak. Crljanak. It's spelled like Crljenak. Crljanak.
I see what you mean with all the consonants. My gosh.
So that's the one reason why I think people should care about Croatian wine. And the second one goes back to, I'm sure you've heard of Gorgic from Napa Valley.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Gorgic basically, for like we talked about communism, he had left Croatia because his family had produced wine and he wanted to be able to produce and sell wine freely. So she brought clippings from Croatia, went to California and Napa Valley, and planted Chardonnay, because Croatia actually grows pretty good Chardonnay too. Planted Chardonnay, planted a whole bunch of stuff. And he went to the Paris tasting. Oh, I don't know the year, so I'm not even going to pretend to say it.
Like I should know that too. It's like 1970 something.
1970 something. I think like
Yeah,
maybe it's 1972. We'll say it's
sure.
1972.
The wine snobs can correct us in the comments. It's fine. We know what we're talking about.
And he won against all French wines. And it is because of that that put Chardonnay from Napa Valley on the map in the wine world.
And you said he brought Croatian grapevines over and like that's what
Yes.
he planted.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I'm saying Croatia, and it's only 4 million people. So like a country of 4 million people, they got some cool things happening.
They do. They do. Okay, let's dive into like I know we can't go into all of them, but maybe let's call out. So I'm thinking like either grapes, one that you think Croatia should be known for. Like what are some that people should look out for when they're visiting Croatia? And then maybe even potentially, I know you said it's hard to get Croatia in the US or outside of Croatia, but any of them that you've seen make their way out of Croatia that people could maybe be on the lookout for if they're not able to
Yeah.
visit.
Well, so I'll just say first off, there's 16 like protected areas in
Okay.
Croatia, like, or you can call them appellations or whatever you want. And basically, in order to be called that area, you have to have like 85% of the grapes be from that specific area. So, fun facts is that Croatia, 2/3 of its grapes are actually white wines. And with Graševina being one of the biggest like planting and selling of it, but it's actually not my favorite wine, so I'm not going to talk about it. I just think it's interesting and good for people to know.
Well, I mean that's the case in like it doesn't Spain have like Aaron or something like that is like their I'm trying to think of how it's pronounced, but like it's the top white wine planted, but like nobody knows about it because it's not that
Yeah,
exciting.
exactly. One wine that I really like in a region is in Pelješac. So if you look at the map of Croatia, you have northern Croatia, southern Croatia, which is called Dalmatia. And in Dalmatia, you have a region of Pelješac. And on Pelješac, there is a grape called Plavac Mali. And like I had said earlier, Plavac Mali is actually the child, I guess you can say, of Zinfandel. And the wine that comes from Pelješac, specifically a region called Dingac, is just amazing. And I actually was trying to get you to taste it on this podcast, but we all know what happened with that.
So hard to get wine sometimes.
But since we can't taste it, I'm just going to tell you about how delicious it is. And I'll tell you a little bit about the region. So what makes Dingac so special is that it's kind of like Mosel in Germany. A lot of them grow on a hillside. And so it gets direct sun all day long. In fact, like some of the everything has to be handpicked. And it's the same thing like Mosel. Sometimes they have to like put you on ropes, like pick grapes. Seriously.
No, I mean I've seen those pictures and I've heard from people. They're like, I had to hold the post to make sure I did not fall down when I was just like doing the tour.
Honestly. So that's one of the most coolest regions for me. And the Plavac Mali that comes from there just tends to be big and bold and velvety and dark fruits. And it's just so flipping good.
And this is just to clarify, it's a red wine, right?
It is a red wine. Yes, it's a red wine. So if you can definitely try Plavac Mali, but specifically from Dingac, because Plavac Mali can grow anywhere. And if you get it on other areas, it's going to be sometimes too tart for me. It's going to have too much like bright raspberries, just like, ugh, I don't like it. But if you get it from Dingac specifically, it's going to have way more darker fruit. Actually, there is one producer that you can find in the United States, and it's called Matushko. And you can get it through Croatia Premium Wine online. And they do have a bottle of Plavat Mali Matushko Dingac. So definitely try that because you can get it in the United States and it is delicious. And then my other favorite grape to talk about comes from the island of Corchula.
This podcast is sponsored by Repour Wine Savers. Listen, I love wine, but that doesn't mean I want to drink a full bottle every night. You see, it's always a risk opening a bottle knowing I'll only have a glass or two. But now I don't worry about that at all because I have Repour. These little contraptions will keep your open bottles of wine good for up to 3 months by removing oxygen from the bottle using fancy chemistry. And they're so easy to use. I simply open a bottle of wine, cork or screw cap, just like normal, and enjoy my glass or two. Then, when I'm ready to call it a night, I rip the foil off my Repour wine saver and place it in the bottle in place of the cork or screw cap, and then stick the bottle in the fridge. Simple as that. Then, whenever I grab another glass from that bottle in the future, I just make sure to put the Repour back on as soon as I'm done pouring. It's that easy. Want to give Repour a try? Head to repour.com, repour.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ for 10% off your order. That's Repour, repour.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ. No spaces in that, and the and is spelt out, so it's CORKANDFIZZ. Once you have Repour, you'll never have to worry about opening a bottle of wine just for one glass. I mean, heck, now you can try 2 or more wines at the same time and have your own at-home wine tasting. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now, let's get back to the show.
Corchula is my favorite place. You guys should
I
all
was gonna say,
Google
I feel
it.
like I feel like I've heard a lot about this, and this must just be like the conversations from the Walla Walla trip coming back.
Yeah. Yes. First of all, everyone who's listening, Google Corchula. It's beautiful. And it's home to 2 indigenous grapes. One of them is called Poship, and Poship they're both white wines. Poship tends to be a more fuller bodied wine. It has like some really nice like essence of apricots and green apple, and it's really delicious. And the other one is called Gurk. And Gurk is one of the most fascinating grapes. It's also one of the hardest to grow grapes because it's all female pollinators. Yeah, female, it's all female. So basically, in order for the grape to grow, it has to be planted with another vine. Otherwise, it won't grow.
Interesting. Are there other grapes that are like this? I've never really heard of this.
I actually have no clue, but I know Gurk is like this.
Yeah, now I'm gonna have to look it up. I'm so curious. This is one of those things. You learn something new about wine every day. You can't possibly know it all.
Exactly. So Gurk comes from a small village called Lumbarda, and Lumbarda is right on the water, and it has sandy soil, which makes it really special to the area. And yeah, you could basically only find it this one little village on this one little island, one little part of the world. And it's very limited, very hard to get, but you can also come on a wine tour with me and I could tell you about it personally. Feel very lucky because my partner, Gabby, who actually is a sommelier from Bordeaux, and she moved to the islands. And we both love wine. So we've created this whole great wine tour business because of it. But Gurk is amazing. And unfortunately, you have to just come to Croatia in order to try it.
Got it. Okay. Fair enough. That's a good enough reason to go to Croatia.
But it's good. I promise you. I'll
Yeah.
bring you a bottle.
Sounds great. Okay, perfect. Let's hear. I want to know, I want to know it all, but I also want to try to narrow it down. One of the questions that I had too, I was curious. So an indigenous grape, right, is the idea that it's a grape that's from that place. So when we're saying an indigenous grape of Croatia, it means it started in Croatia. It wasn't brought from anywhere else.
Exactly.
Have you noticed, so when we think of a lot of grapes, like the indigenous grapes of Italy, they've been brought over to the US or they've been brought over to Australia. Have you ever heard of people taking indigenous grapes of Croatia and growing them anywhere else? Or is it one of those things where they're solely found in Croatia?
So recently I was in Russian River and I was at this winery called Sunce. And ironically, the owner is Croatian. And it's funny because Sunce, it was so crazy. Basically, I was on my way driving to another winery and I saw this big sun because Sunce means sun. And I literally screamed and made everyone stop in the car. And I was like, Sunce. So turns out he was. I ran out of the car. It was this old little Croatian man, and he came from Croatia to the United States, and he's actually growing a grape called Teran. And Teran comes from Istria typically, and which is northern Croatia. And he told me that Teran grows really great in the Russian River Valley. I had never heard of Teran growing anywhere other than in Croatia. So yeah, I don't know. There's other than Zinfandel, I really haven't heard of a lot of Croatian grapes making it outside of the country. A lot of people think Malvasia. So they think, oh, because northern Croatia too, so in Istria region grows a lot of Malvasia, but it's actually genetically DNA completely different than what grows in Italy.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I know. So even though it is called Malvasia, the DNA is completely different.
So it's going to make a totally different wine.
Exactly. I know. Fun
Cool.
facts.
Oh, so fun. Okay. I want to know about, you talk a lot about food and wine pairing. I'm going off script a little bit because I thought of this. I'm like, oh, why haven't I asked her this yet?
Yeah.
What about pairings? When you're pairing wine and food in Croatia, what are some either some favorite dishes that are just oh, I gotta grab this wine. It just goes with it perfectly. Or do you have more of a is the philosophy whatever we find to drink with whatever we're eating works well because that's just we make the wine for the food.
Well, that's the other thing. I always think going back to traveling and wine, I think what you eat and what you drink is really reflective on the country, right? And especially on the coast of Croatia, it's all about seafood. You're getting fresh caught fish and octopus and mussels and this just deliciousness. If you like seafood, it's delicious. So going back to example, like Gurk. So Gurk tends to be when you're drinking it, you literally can taste the seawater. It sounds funky. It's literally like saline. Saline, there's even a little bit of bitterness to it, but it pairs so perfectly with fish because of that kind of salty aspects of it. Plavac for example, is a heavier wine, and it goes great with this dish in Croatia called pastisada. And pastisada is slow cooked meat for 2 days, ironically in a red wine sauce, paired with homemade gnocchi, and it's insane. In northern Croatia, they're really known for truffles.
Mm.
And actually, so you have the white truffle, and it grows only two places in the world, Alba in Italy and in Istria. Fun facts.
Wow.
I know, fun facts.
No wonder they're so expensive. That's making sense now.
I know. Well, what was crazy? I was in Istria a couple of years ago, and the lady literally was taking her truffles and driving them to Venice and selling them to a restaurant in Venice.
Dang.
Yeah, I know. So I think the food and wine really pairs beautifully. And yeah, and it's culture. So I go to my boyfriend's parents' house for lunch on a Tuesday, and they have their own wine on the table. And they're like, Jennifer, have a glass or two. And I'm like, it's lunch. It's 12 o'clock.
It's a whole different philosophy when you're in Europe.
It really is, but it's normal. It's not a big deal. It's what? They're like,
Yeah.
it's two glasses. Two glasses is nothing. It's good for your heart.
And clearly they're doing something right over there. I think we should follow follow
I
along in
think so
there.
too.
All right. So we hit on some of the grapes, and you did say that they grow a lot of indigenous grapes. So you do find Chardonnay. Are there any other kind of major grapes that people would know of that are grown in Croatia, like that you would say do well?
Yeah, I mean, Cabernet Sauvignon does really well, Syrah, but the thing with Syrah, it tends to be brighter. It's not like a Rhone varietal or even something that you'll find maybe in Barossa Valley. It's a much brighter Syrah. You're getting a lot more raspberries in there and like it's a little bit more tart. So if you like that style of wine and a Syrah, then definitely try it. But yeah, you can find Chardonnay, you can find Syrah, you can find Cabernet Sauvignon. But to be honest, mostly when you go out to a restaurant, you're going to find a lot more. It's going to be predominantly indigenous grapes.
No, and I feel like that's the way it should be. I'm glad that they do that. Like that's what I would want
Yeah,
to taste, right?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Anything else we should know about Croatian wine? I mean, everything, but anything that you can fit in the next like 5 minutes on the podcast. Anything that I didn't ask you about and you were waiting for me to say, Haley, ask me this question.
I think what's important to note, so they have a classification system in Croatia where it's like table wine, quality wine, and then high quality wine called vrhunsko vino. And just because something says table wine doesn't mean that it's not good. So the problem is that basically when someone is making wine, in order to qualify for vrhunsko, I'm butchering this, sorry, Balkan people, it gets sent to like a panel of winemakers and they have to pay really high fees and it's a really slow turnaround time. So a lot of really big predominant winemakers don't even submit it to them and they just call it table wine. So I always tell people like if you're buying your own wine at a restaurant or something, like don't pay attention to the fact that it says high quality wine. Like the table wine is probably, if not better than the high quality wine.
That's such a great thing to point out. I think that's the same thing around here with like why you'll notice that a lot of wineries don't say organic or biodynamic on them and don't have those kinds of things, right? The smaller wineries, especially because like it costs a lot of money to get that certification. And, it's already takes a lot of money to make wine, let alone have to do that when it's like, no, you just have to know the producer and know that they make good wine, which was going to be my kind of like the last question on this. I do, want to learn, for folks that want to learn more, if you have any resources you'd recommend, obviously the book A Year in the Future, we will recommend that. But and then also like if we see Croatian wine on a menu, if we, I know there is that website, would you say it was Croatian wine?
Croatia premium wine. Yes, you can
Okay.
buy it there.
Are there wines that like how do we know when we're looking at the list of wines? Is there any way to know which ones are worth trying and which are like, no, that's the barefoot of Croatia, avoid?
The problem, this is me being very honest, and it's unfortunate. The problem is the wines that you're going to get in the United States are bigger wineries, people that can afford to pay the import costs, people that can actually spare wine. Oh, for example, a lot of these wines, like for example, on Cortula, they sell out just selling it to people in restaurants and stuff. So I think that my philosophy on the subject is go to Croatia Premium Wine, for example, and try some stuff to introduce yourself to the wines of Croatia. And then you should call me and just come to Croatia.
You know what? That tracks. I think that makes sense. You're like, here, start here, but then here's where you're gonna end because I just know you're gonna need to do this.
Because let's be honest, Haley, what's better than being on a yacht, drinking a glass of wine in the sunset?
Yeah, no, I really can't think of much. I mean, and somebody else has done all the planning for you. We always talk about this. Like one of the biggest sells of the Walla Walla trip, you were like, oh, you're planning it for me? Great. I just get to come along for the ride and do all this. And it's like, that's what you'd be doing in Croatia. Because as much fun as it is to like plan the whole trip, like you said, I mean, there were over 1,000 islands. Like, how do you
Yeah,
know where to go? And it's
1,244.
like, you can help them do that. And that's what that is for. So I love that. Okay. We're coming to the end and I just have a little mini speed round. This doesn't have to be Croatia based, though. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them fall under Croatia for you, but it's just a little fun to kind of like, I ask all my guests these questions. So we'll start with what is your favorite wine at the moment?
Oh my gosh. I'm really obsessed with that wine we had at Del Mas. You know,
Ooh, yes, yeah. It's hard not to be.
that Syrah was just bananas. Like it was so freaking good. or just to be honest, just in general, Walla Walla wine. I was really blown away by the Rhone varietals. And like I said earlier, I really like darker, luscious wines. And I mean, from Del Mas to Roti, like there's just some beautiful things that are coming out of Walla Walla, I have to say.
Yeah. Oh, that I love hearing that because I'm like, I'm championing that region. More people need to know about Walla
Yeah,
Walla wine, which, like, honestly, we're not a tiny little island in or island country in Europe, and we still have a hard time getting our wines out there to people. I'm saying we
yeah.
as if I'm part of Walla Walla. I am now. I'm saying I am, but like, it's hard to get Walla Walla wine outside of there.
I mean, look, when I'm in the United States, I'm living in New York, and I cannot find I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a wine from Walla Walla.
I think we just need to like keep, I mean, the only thing I can think of is like I just keep asking at the small wine shops. I just keep mentioning it. I keep highlighting it. And I'm like, if more people can keep asking for it, and the same thing with Croatian wine, hopefully we can kind of create this,
Exactly.
create the economy for these wines to be brought in and be, shared across the world.
I agree. Because to be honest, if you can find some outstanding wines from France and Italy and everything like that, it's because there's a demand for it. There's a demand for it. You being an ambassador for, all these amazing places like Walla Walla, and me being an ambassador for Croatia, hopefully one day we'll go into a restaurant and it'll be like, oh my God, there's 10 Walla Walla wines and there's 5 Croatian wines. That would be so cool.
I know it's going to happen. We're going to make it happen.
I know, one day.
Okay, next question. What is your favorite wine region that you've ever visited?
Mm. God, that's such a hard question. All of them? Favorite wine region? I will say one of the ones I guess that was most surprising to me. I lived in Australia for a while, and there's this island, Waikiki. Once again, butchering names. I typically tend to like wine regions that are also near the sea, ironically. Ocean, ironically. There's an island, and they had some amazing wines. And I think it was this like happy marriage. Like their Syrah, their rosé Syrah is amazing. Like just what I had from there. I really liked that. I like the really kind of underdog Rhine regions, Walla Walla, Croatia, Waikiki Island, and New Zealand. Don't get me wrong, Napa Valley is beautiful and amazing, but I don't like to pay $100 for a tasting.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's also something special to like going to a region where you're like, I feel like I'm here before the crazy has happened, or like before, like,
Yeah,
it's like I'm on the inside scoop. I know of this before everybody else does, or it just feels, yeah, it's more welcoming, it's chiller. Like, yeah, I love Napa. I found some really great wineries there. But yeah, it doesn't reach the top of my favorite wine regions visited because of, yeah, it's expensive and you expect a lot too, I think.
yeah, I know. I know. You get dressed up, you put on makeup, you're like, okay, let's have a day.
Okay, so now this one, I don't know if this is going to be a harder or an easier question for you. How about a wine region you'd like to visit?
I want to go to the Rhone Valley. I've never been. And I'm obsessed with Rhone varietals. And it's been on my list for such a long time. It's just about getting out there. And want to take a trip? Let's go.
Absolutely. I'm going to France in September, and I had the same problem of like I needed to limit. I was trying to do the thing where I'm like, okay, you can't go to a new place every day. You're going to get so tired. And so I
Yeah.
had to limit, and we're just doing Loire Valley, Burgundy, and Jura because we're only there for like 10 days and we're doing a couple days in Paris, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm already ready to go back again. And I haven't even gone the first time because I'm like, there's also the Rhone and there's Provence and then there's
I
Alsace in the
know.
north, and I want to go there too.
Yeah.
It's so hard. I like hearing that from you as somebody who actually does travel a lot, that like it's even hard for you to travel to these regions.
Well, it is. It seriously is. It is really hard. And it's been on my, like, I have a friend of mine that lives in France and she's like, Jennifer, just come. And I'm like, just coming. It's like time.
Right? It's like it can't happen that way. But we'll keep enjoying the wine from those regions and it can make us feel a little bit like we're there.
Exactly. Or I can come to Walla Walla also.
Yes, I like that. Okay, how about favorite wine and food pairing? And again, it can just be of the moment. It doesn't have to be like the ultimate wine and food pairing.
So one of the traditions for my birthday since I turned 21 is Prosecco and birthday cake for breakfast.
Oh, that's so fun.
Fancy one or anything, but I know there's something about like off dry bubbles in birthday cake, which is the best thing in the world.
Like that. I have a feeling you're going to start a tradition for quite a few people now.
Yeah, for breakfast, specifically on your
Yes.
birthday.
Okay. All right. I love it. Okay. Last question. And I feel like you could probably take this a couple different ways. So maybe start with just in the US, and then I'm curious. This actually brings me to a question we could ask about Croatia. Best bottle of wine under $15 for somebody who kind of wants to stay under a budget, but they want like something reliable under $15.
I was thinking about this earlier, and I don't know, like wine production has gotten so expensive, and you go to a lot of these small production wineries, and there's so many costs today. And I think personally, I've had a hard time finding a bottle of wine under 15. Can we do it under 30?
I mean, you're not the first person to say that. I think it's like a good thing to call out too, of like, in order to get something that low cost, you're going to have to get from a large winery, or you can't support a local small producer because they can't afford to drop their prices that low.
And that's the truth. When you just look at, I mean, the cost of everything today is so high. I mean, I went out to get a coffee in New York City, and it was actually a tea, and they were freaking 30% tip on a to-go like chai latte. And I was like, excuse me? Like, no, the answer is no. So, I mean, yeah, you can get a chai latte for $15. So I would say one I'm kind of obsessed with is in Russian River, you have Miramar Estate, and they make an Albarino there. The story of them, if you have a chance, I would look them up. Basically, it's all female owned. The original person came from Spain, and it's a cool story. I'm not going to get into the whole story because that could be a whole different podcast. Basically, her family was wine producers in Spain. She wanted to have her own winery. Her dad wouldn't let her, so she was like, I'm going to move to California and make my own wine.
Hell yeah.
And it was really cool. And now her daughter is kind of running it, and they make an Albarino, and I think it's like maybe like $28 on their website. It's amazing. Definitely just like order a bottle for yourself, just to have. I would say that for the United States. Europe is different. You can find amazing bottles of wine for like 10 euros.
Right. Well, that was going to be my question. So just to kind of finish this all off and we'll tie it back to Croatia, like what would be like, do you have like a go-to bottle when you're in Croatia? Do you visit the local wine shop for that? Do you just go to the grocery store kind of? And what does like the budget look like when you're shopping for wine in Croatia?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can find an amazing bottle of wine for 10 euros. I have a couple of them that I want to call out because I'm obsessed with all of them, and they're just amazing humans. So I would say for Poship, which is the white wine that grows on Korčula, I really love, there's a new wine producer called Tasovac, and they had that story where they were making wine for themselves as a family, and then were doing such a good job that they transitioned to making it to sell. And that is, you can get that under $15. There's a wine region in Dalmatia called Vrgovac. Once again, I'm so bad at pronouncing all of this. I'm so sorry.
I'll have you write a couple of them down. We'll make sure to put them in the show notes so people know what to look for because we won't know how to say it or spell it either.
There's a really small family producer called Crystal Crystal Modrus, and family winery, and they make a grape called Turnat. And it's a red grape, also grown predominantly in Bosnia. It's fabulous. They're fantastic. And Poretta Winery in Korčula Island for Poship too. And all of these wines, and that's the thing is, all of these wines are amazing wines. And you're not spending like in the United States $60 for a bottle or something like that.
Right. You just got to
I know.
spend to get there. And then once you're there, you're good, right? All right. Well, one more time before we go, tell us about the food and wine tour, the dates, the details, all of that, and I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes so people can go check it out.
Yeah, so it's August 24th to 31st. We go from Dubrovnik to Split, and we island hop. You can jump right off the boat into the sea. It's really amazing. It's 18 cabins, 36 people max. And I'm more than halfway sold out. So if you want to come, definitely, book ASAP. And I have a special promotion for you guys. And Haley's going to promote, like tell you a little bit more now. But special promotion for all you guys listening. Basically, if you are a fan of delicious food, and even if you don't like seafood, it's all customized. It's a customized food and wine cruise, island hopping, visit family-owned farms, bespoke small production wineries, and tanning on the Adriatic Sea on a yacht. I mean, what gets better?
Sounds amazing.
I know. 2025, you're coming.
Yes, I love it. Perfect. Okay, how should people get that special promotion, or how should they reach out so that they can take advantage of it?
Honestly, they can just send us an email, go to our website, anchorcroatia.com. Our Instagram is the Anchor Croatia. And just tell them that you listened to the wonderful Haley on her podcast, and I will make sure that you get that special promotion and a complimentary bottle of wine. So, yeah.
Ooh, wonderful. Starting off strong. You just end up in Croatia and you get a bottle of wine. Oh, that
Exactly.
sounds lovely. Okay, Jen, I'm so excited for all the things to come and everything. I'm so glad we got to connect. Thank God for Instagram for helping us
Right?
find each other. Isn't that wild?
I
I've had
know.
such a great conversation and can't wait to see what else you end up doing and what you teach me about Croatian wine.
I'm excited. Well, it was so good to see you, Haley, and thank you for everything.
Yes, thanks. Cheers. So, who's ready to go to Croatia? Because it has definitely made it on my bucket list and on my travel list for sure. Now, I want to make sure you caught the special bonuses that Jen is offering you. So, her food and wine cruise is normally around 3,600 euro per person. This is the food and wine cruise that is going from August 24th to the 31st in 2024. Goes from Dubrovnik to Split. I'm probably not saying that as well as Jen did, but you know what I'm talking about. You're going to island hop, eat local food, learn about the indigenous grapes on the island. A lot of them that she mentioned during this podcast, you will get a chance to taste and taste in Croatia, so you know it's going to be the best. Now, like I mentioned, this cruise is typically 3,600 euro per person. For podcast listeners, until the cabins are sold out, you can get this for just 2,580 euro, which don't worry, I did the math for you. For those of us that are in the US and in Canada, that is $2,800 per person. That is a major discount, and that is for a whole food and wine cruise in Croatia. So reach out to her. You can find her on her website, anchorcroatia.com, or on Instagram, the Anchor Croatia. These will all be linked in the show notes. Reach out to her and just mention this podcast and you will get that discount. Now, if you have plans to visit Croatia already, or it's past the dates for her food and wine cruise, she is also offering 20% off a customized sailing trip or 20% off wine tours in Croatia if you want to go visit, but you missed out on the food and wine cruise. So again, just reach out to her and mention this podcast to get that special discount. Now, if you love this episode as much as I did, I'd so appreciate if you could take a quick second, rate it, leave a review in whatever podcast app that you're using at the moment, and of course, share it with other wine lovers in your life, especially those that are interested in new and different wines. I bet they would love to learn about Croatian wine. In next week's episode, I will be sharing a little wine travel guide for visiting Santa Barbara in California. This is definitely one of my favorite wine places in the US. I mean, Walla Walla is probably at the top, but Santa Barbara is a close second. It's so beautiful and they are wonderful places. I'm going to share with you some of the wineries that I visited, some tips for whether you should get a rental car, whether you should hire a car service, and where you should stay. I've got lots of information here and I'm really excited to share it with you. Thanks again for listening, and as a thank you, I'd like to share my free shopping guide, 15 wines under $15. Simply head to my website, corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and join my mailing list. Cheers!